Until everybody's passed out.
Until everybody's passed out, right. Then we need to take your keys. All right, so fortunately we have a hell of a panel tonight. We've been very fortunate to get the panel that we have here tonight, and the crowd shows. We normally get about 30 to 40 people, which is a nice crowd for our tech meetups. In honor of Innovation Week, which is what's going on this week, and this is really one of the kind of kickoff events for Innovation Week. It's running the next 2 weeks in Baltimore. And you can see if you go to Technically Baltimore, there's a link to Innovation Week, and you can see the website. And there's 2 weeks of technical events these next 2 weeks. So we thought we'd do our part and host this panel tonight. The theme of the panel is innovation, and specifically technology innovation. So I'd first like to introduce myself and introduce the panel members tonight. I am the CEO of Mindgrub. You are in Mindgrub's headquarters. We have another office across the street, a sales office in New York. We've been really growing. We focus on mobile, social, and web apps. We also run the Baltimore Tech Meetup, which is once a month. We have a tech meetup in essentially our vault downstairs, our basement. And it's a really good opportunity to come network, to hear some different ongoings in technology. So tonight we actually have a killer panel, which is why I think everybody came out. First we have Ann Sigman. Ann is the COO of Social Toaster. The CEO, Brian Razak, a lot of you probably know. He actually started a Drupal company, BMT, and then wanted to kind of pivot into products, which I'm very similar. I wanted to pivot into products, so I have a product company as well. But these guys are absolutely making it happen. They've got a ton of staff right now. They're one of the first real kind of grassroots products companies in Baltimore. So Ann, her focus is to grow extraordinary products and sales. Social Toaster, it's a social marketing tool that delivers your content directly to your supporters, social networks, driving electronic word-of-mouth traffic. Essentially, people are ambassadors. They sign up for your brand to be an ambassador, and then if you want to send a social message and you want to use social media marketing, then your ambassadors will kind of redistribute that information to you. It's a brilliant concept. They've really been rocking it. They just got a really big, would you call it a Series B round? A. It is a Series A round. So they had some friends and family. Now they're at Series A, which is really difficult in Baltimore. We have really kind of a emerging venture capital group here. So, Ann Sigman. Next we have, going in order here, Ed Mullin on the end. Ed is the CIO, Vice President of Consulting Services at LCG Technologies in Towson, Maryland. In this role, Ed works with forward-thinking businesses that are focused on using technology to move the needle and keep them ahead of competitors. Ed's goal is to help coordinate leaders to determine how to invest in information technology so that every dollar pays off at the corporate bottom line. Something about Ed, Dave Troy, a lot of you probably know Dave Troy, is a big advocate for technology in Baltimore. He recently did a social graph of all the people in Baltimore who do networking and do social communication. And Ed actually is the biggest hub of social networking. So, he'll talk your ear off. He's a great talker, but he's also extremely networked. So really good guy to kind of get networked with and figure out how to kind of expand your reach in the social community. Next in the middle, we have Jason Hardebeck. Jason Hardebeck is gb.tc's chief investigator.
Instigator.
Instigator. Investigator, too. He's the chief instigator. It was formerly the Greater Baltimore Technology Council, which was kind of an older, antiquated name. He's really, really shaking things up. I sit on the board of the gb.tc and have been really impressed what he's doing now. The council celebrates the people and companies in and around Baltimore who dare to be great. He's got over 20 years of leadership and entrepreneurial experience in many different industries, ranging from nuclear engineering, plant management, product management, and supply chain management, business development, and GM responsibilities. If you haven't heard, he had a company, Blue, which he sold the intellectual property to Facebook. So that's really big. That's a huge success for Baltimore. And we're fortunate enough to have him now lead Baltimore's Technology Council. So another phenomenal member of our board. Next we have Vince Talbert. Vince has 20 years of marketing, internet, and credit card experience. Not buying things on credit card. Currently, Vince is the VP of Merchant Marketing at PayPal, an eBay company. Vince joined eBay through the acquisition of BillMeLater. He was one of the early founders of BillMeLater and grew that and then sold that to PayPal. It was a $1 billion acquisition, which is big money we're talking about. So drinks on Vince. In just 8 years, BillMeLater went from an idea to $100 million in revenue, with 4 million consumers making purchases at over 1,000 retailers' websites, call centers, and stores. BillMeLater was ranked number 6 in the Inc. 500 in 2007, and it was acquired by eBay for $1 billion. And last but not least, we have Chris Brandenburg, another huge success in Baltimore. He is the co-founder and CTO of Millennial Media. He co-founded it with Paul, you might have heard of. He has extensive background in architecting, implementing, and operating complex, highly scaled, intelligent transaction systems. He's a technology leader in advertising, optimization, and wireless technologies. In his role as CTO, Chris leads the development and operations of the company's Midas platform, as well as the technological roadmap for the company. Chris is another huge success story for Baltimore. He was one of the originals at advertising.com, which did get bought by AOL. And then he and some of the originals split off to create Millennial Media. They've had huge success. They're one of the big Baltimore success stories going IPO, and really focusing on mobile advertising. So before we get into this, just a big round for the panel. All right, one more word of note, since you guys all have smartphones on you. If you have a flip phone, shame on you. But you can still text message with it, so it's okay. Dan is going to be Dan, this is Mindgrub COO here. Dan is going to be monitoring our tweet stream. And if you have a question, he's going to actually curate those questions. So if it's a bad question, we'll go through. But if it's a good question, he's actually going to slip me little notes, and we'll kind of roll them out. We're going to keep this pretty dynamic. So I have a list of questions. We got some feedback from people in the Baltimore Washington Tech Meetup who had some specific questions. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to go through different questions, and I'm breaking them up by the beginnings of a company, because everybody is chomping at the bit to start a company. So we're going to focus on the beginnings of the company. Then we're going to look at the early years and what it takes to go from potentially being in a basement to actually getting office space and growing. Then we're going to focus on the growth years. And then lastly, we have some questions that are generic questions that we will go through as well, such as how to scale the operation, and then things like we had a HTML5 versus native app questions and some other generic questions. If you have specific questions, and specifically, we're going to keep this dynamic as I'm kind of moderating here. If you have some great questions that are follow-ups, etc., then use BWTech, right? That's the hashtag, BWTech hashtag. It'll get to Dan. He's going to slip them to me. We're going to go generally for about an hour with the questions that I have. Then we're going to just have an open forum for about 30 minutes. And then we're going to go back to networking, because a lot of people want to have conversations. And until the beer's drained, by all means, you can stick around. All right. So, we cued that music, by the way. That's a lowrider, right? I say, hey, right when we're starting out, roll by with a lowrider. All right, so some of the first questions. We're going to focus on the beginning of starting a company, because that's where everyone's at. Everyone can't stand working in their cube, and they want to know how to begin things. So, and some of these questions are out to anybody in the panel. Other ones, I know a little bit of your background and might specifically target you. So, the first question is, what gave you the courage to quit your day job? Everybody wants to know, how do I go from the day job to actually starting a company and knowing that there's going to be some lean years there? So I know Vince, Chris, I know you guys were very much at an early onset. Did you have a day job? What made you quit, and why did you go for it?
I'll take a step. Yeah. So I worked, it's a long time ago, it was the first bubble. And back in 2000, and I did my .com thing, and it blew up, and the company didn't completely blow up, but I learned the most important lesson of my career, which was don't take a job for how much money or how big your title or how secure it is. The most important thing you learn is take a job for who you're going to work with, and at the end of the day, you're joining a team and a family, and that's what BillMeLater came for us, was a family. And so I took the risk of leaving what I couldn't stand because I was working with people I didn't trust, didn't know real well, and had taken that job for all the wrong reasons. And great learning experience. I was young relatively, and then found some people I'd worked with for 15 years, and we said we want to work together. We don't know exactly what it was. Actually turned down some really freaking cool jobs in town because I didn't know who those people were, but I knew the people I was working with, and I didn't know what we were going to do. But I took the risk of working with people I knew and I trusted, and I knew I would love working with every day. And from there, great things are born. If you trust the people you're working next to, you're committed to the same vision, you share the same kind of motivations, you'll create great stuff.
Excellent. And Chris, you didn't really quit a day job. You had an exit. What was the time span between exiting ad.com and beginning Millennial Media?
Well, yeah, I think the time span was about a month and a half. So for that, AOL bought AdCom in 2004, and I actually stuck around there for about 18 months, maybe a little bit longer than that. And I wish I had a story about analyzing all the options and figuring out what was right, but the culture started to change, and I thought that sucked and left. And so hindsight, it was great, but at the time, my wife was pregnant, we were just buying a house, like the very worst time that you could possibly do that, to say, hey, I'm going to leave and I don't really have a place to land. But times were different back then, and so I figured I could, at worst case, I could consult.
And did you and Paul leave at the same time?
No, Paul left in 2000, so he was very early.
Wow.
He was very early at AdCom, but then went off to Verizon Wireless and really helped to drive the data platform for that business. And so, when I left, I actually didn't have any idea that I was going to be starting Millennial or doing anything. I'd actually done some consulting with a colleague that was at ad.com at the time. But I just would kind of go in and I feel like I'm a builder. I got to get my hands dirty and kind of get into things. And there I would go in and say, this is what you guys should build, and then I would leave. It felt very incomplete for me. And so, after a couple of those, I decided, I really want to go off and build something. And our current COO, Steve Root, who was the COO at AdCom at the time, has been friends with Paul for years and years, and said, hey, you ought to talk to this guy if you guys both happen to be unemployed. So, might as well get that. And it was the standard, Starbucks startup story. We met at the Starbucks. We talked about, some different ideas that we each had, and, we kind of settled on where our two sort of expertise overlap. He's the a mobile guy, on the mobile business side, and I was more ad serving technology side, and chocolate and peanut butter, and off we went. So that was that's really the story. I really, every time I tell it, I feel like, boy, that is the dumbest thing that anybody could ever do. But it's been very lucky, and it's worked out. So
Excellent. So you guys, what would you say was the number one motivator for starting a new company?
For me, it was definitely it was definitely the idea of being able to build something of my own design, and not really having to answer to anybody. We were able to just because of who we were. Paul was a executive director at Verizon. I was senior director at AdCom. So we had the right background to be able to get funding very quickly. And so we got that in place, and that was really the big driver. Mobile, it certainly back then and even today, it's a really complicated thing. And so the very last thing in the world that I thought I would do after leaving AdCom was to do an advertising startup. I didn't envision that was the path I would take forward. But it was, after talking to Paul and then looking and finding out how hard it was to get your little Motorola V3 to connect up and identify who you were and all of those sorts of things that are necessary for advertising, it became a much more intriguing problem, and that was kind of the driver for me. So
yeah. So mine was a little bit of the, what's that old saying? Necessity is the mother of invention. So I wanted to live in Baltimore. My wife's from here, and I'm from here. I wanted to work with a set of people that I wanted to work with. And I wanted to build something. I kind of always built something within a big company. And I really wanted to have kind of our own thing. So it was kind of like the only solution was create your own business and create your own entity, because there was no great jobs that I really wanted, although I did turn out some pretty cool jobs. But it was really the motivator, the biggest motivator is working with people that I knew and I trusted, and being part of that team probably drove me. I mean, it was, similar to you. It felt like the stupidest decision I ever made. At the time, I had a big 6-acre property, and I would drive the mower. It'd take me 5 hours to mow the lawn. And I remember the entire summer of 2000, I was being courted by 2 different companies in town to be their head of marketing, and then I was doing this consulting on this thing, working with my friends, and it was like, what are you doing? Why are you going to go do this? You don't even know what it is. I didn't know what it was called, didn't know. I just knew a general area of where we're going to work together. And I turned down really good jobs because I just wanted to work with people that I knew and I trusted. And so I tell people, find your team and the rest will fall in place.
And that's actually really good advice. Find your team and the rest will fall in place. And it leads nicely to the next question. So you guys really were at the formation of that team. Then the next question for Ann. Ann's been a long-time COO for a number of companies, but recently joined Brian, and Brian's not here, so I can talk about him. He's my age. Actually, I think he might be younger than me. I don't know, I'm pretty young, but he had a company, BMT. He started Social Toaster and just had an idea. So the question for you is, what did you see in Brian that gave you the confidence that you should quit whatever job you had before and come on board and help him grow Social Toaster?
Well, I never had a real job, so that helped.
Never had a real
Never
job?
had a real job.
What were your non-real jobs?
Owning businesses, self-employed, actually had partnerships before going into the partnership with Brian. So that helped to allow me to vet the relationship pretty well. But to speak towards the question, though, I think it's really important, the things that Vince was talking about, is that you have a good team. Brian and I worked together. I had a consulting business. We worked together for a number of years before deciding to put the businesses together. I call it dating before getting married.
So you work with him at BMT?
At BMT.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. All right.
Yeah. And during that time, there were just so many ideas that were coming from us working together, and things that we saw that we could do to build something bigger and better. And really the mission when you start a business is to grow the business to a point where you don't have to work in it anymore. I mean, that's the dream, is that you've actually been able to sell it, or that it is sustainable without your day-to-day involvement. So Brian and I both saw that as the vision for BMT. It ended up that Social Toaster may be the vision that takes us there. But we shared that vision and that goal together, and that's why we decided to put the company together. And I think that's what you were saying about the team. The people that you had that you wanted to work with, you knew that you could share that vision, and that was something that, as a group, is much greater than one person. So, that's the real catalyst behind us putting the companies together.
And we've actually talked before where normally you have a product or you have a company that you're either a services company or you're a product company, or maybe you split them apart and you're a apparel entrepreneur and you split the fence, which normally is really hard to achieve. One thing, you guys are still maintaining BMT, doing services work, and you clearly are really growing a product company. Do you find that is possible to do in parallel?
We've been doing it. It's difficult. It really is, because you really do have two different business models that you have to sustain. But one of the things, again, that allows us to do that is that even though we've divided parts of the team into the product team, parts of the team into the web development services team, we still are like one big family. And the culture is very important. We have a culture of collaboration, a culture where we can make fun of each other and nobody gets their feelings hurt, most of the time anyway. And you know, we have Beer O'Clock Fridays, just like this, but they start a little earlier. So,
They start with our production meetings earlier in the day.
but you know, that culture and you know that shared vision is so important to any company. You can have a great idea, and it'll fail if the team doesn't share that vision with you. So I think everybody with VMT, Social Toaster, we've really defined what the web services division looks like, how it's supporting Social Toaster, really tried to clearly define what Social Toaster is and what our mission is. And you know, it's just so important for the team, regardless of how big it is. You know, we've gone, you know, to have different sizes. We're about 18 to 20 now. And you know, it's just so important that everyone share that vision, they drink the Kool-Aid, and they're on the team with us.
Yeah. So that's actually a good caveat, because I want to start pulling Jason and Ed about drinking that Kool-Aid. You guys really started, you know, from you know, kind of grassroots, looking at the industry and figuring out a differentiator in the industry. But there's also another thing you can do with a company, and that's really pivoting. And Jason really took the GBTC and really pivoted it. So Jason, along those lines, what was your thought processes behind where the GBTC was and then where you were able to pivot to bring it to next? Why did you think, because you've made some radical changes with the GBTC. They were a membership model and they got rid of it. Now it's as Jeff said earlier, it's a pay-as-you-play model. It's a totally different business model. It's not unlike starting a new company. What made you just go for it and completely pivot GBTC into a new business model?
Well, I'd say the jury's still out, somewhat. My first day on the job was Pearl Harbor Day, so for a Navy guy it was kind of ironic last year. But I'll say this, that the real, what really got me was, you know, I called myself a disgruntled ex-member for the last couple of years. And I felt like, and Hulu's business was membership association, so I'm very familiar with the model. And a lot of the alphabet organizations are having a real tough time in justifying this paywall. What convinced me actually was one of the board members who I know very well said, you know, we've been bitching about this for years, why don't you come fix it? And I said, well, okay, on one condition, that I can break anything. And if you get rid of me, it's going to be really public and really messy. So I'm just throwing it out there. And I got the board's commitment that, you know, this is, you know, whatever you think needs to happen, you know, we'll fully support. So you know, we blew up the office and did a bunch of other things. But in reality, I think it's not risky at all. The most risk is actually maintaining the status quo when you know you're heading for an iceberg. And to me, the entire, and all you have to do is, you know, I call myself a sincere plagiarist. I do not have original thoughts, but I can pretty good at looking at other models and seeing how they translate. And so for me, it's what's happening in, you know, the online world when you're leaving, you know, you're going from like an enterprise software model to apps and pay-as-you-go and freemium models. It's pretty easy to see how that translates to what you know, an organization like GBTC is. But it's not just like gut and instinct. I mean, I'm an engineer ultimately. I like having data and, you know, and something to quantify and back it up. And when we looked at the membership data, you see that 90% of our revenue over the last 3 years came from 10% of those largest members. So in a sense, essentially those largest companies were subsidizing everyone else, and all the small companies that represented 10% of the revenue were basically paying for dues. And they weren't really accessing any services. So really what we did is drop the paywall. And we really have stepped back to say that rather than trying to compete, let's go to where the puck's going to be, right? And let's figure out how we can collaborate and actually add to you know, things like this or whatever's going on. I mean, it's become so easy to do a meetup, to do events. The barriers have come. I mean, this week and next week are perfect examples. I mean, it's like you make a decision, and every day which of these 15 different events should I go to. So ultimately, I'm a big believer in market forces, and if you can't stand on your own merits, then you don't deserve to exist. And GBTC, like other organizations, we're not a country club. We don't have some unique asset like a golf course where limited, scarcity is a value, it's a benefit. It's not. We're selling community. So anything that detracts from that detracts from the value. So in reality, it's actually a pretty low risk move.
Great, it's amazing low risk, but it's still, at the end of the day, whether you're starting up or you're pivoting, it's still capitalizing on, disruption in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And membership organizations are prime for disruption. Mm-hmm. Ed, to pull you in, how later, so Nigel, I assume, started the company, right?
Yeah, no, actually Tom Lang started it 17 years ago.
Okay, excellent. And Nigel's the current CEO president.
Nigel bought it last spring after sort of running it for 7 years.
Okay. And then when did you come on board? And this is LCG.
I came on board last August.
And you're now the CIO.
That's correct.
So then kind of to carry these conversations, LCG, has it been just kind of going swimmingly the whole time? Have you guys had to pivot at all? And then if you had to pivot, how did the team members, how was that kind of co-working with those team members instrumental in getting you where you are now?
So you know how politicians get asked one question and answer another one?
Yeah.
I'm going to answer the first question and you guys ask the other two because it's funny, unless you want to tell the story.
I'm not telling any stories.
So I had this perfectly good CTO job at a banking software company until I started hanging out with this guy that's married to a friend of mine's sister. So we would go to parties and we'd be talking about startups all the time. So I had done my master's thesis on shortest path algorithms and figured out that the networks between people, like back then we called it 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon and we had all these other terms for it. And this guy goes, I think that could be a company. I think I can sell that. So I write this little prototype at my kitchen counter, and damn it if this guy doesn't sell it to the military academies. And then he goes, you got to quit your job now. I've already sold the product. And that would be Mr. Hardebeck here. And that's how I ended up leaving a perfectly good day job. But the real question was, we really...
Did you work at Hulu then? Oh, really?
So it's a much more interesting story.
It's Baltimore, by the way, yeah.
It is indeed.
But we were into it. We couldn't even articulate what it was. It wasn't like anybody knew what social media was. But we knew that the connections, you were talking about my network or whatever, even back then it was like, what's important is the connections between people. And I'm not sure we thought it was going to be what Facebook turned into being, but we knew it was important. So we kind of ran around. Back in the day, there was a happy hour every night for startups. VC money was rolling around, and we were in a loft in Fells Point. But it was wild. It was like jumping off a cliff. My wife was like, "What? You want to go work with Jason?" Anyway. So
my wife said the same thing about you, Ed. So.
And his wife had known me since childhood. She was really what? Anyway.
So you guys actually grew up together, or your wife grew up with Ed?
My brother-in-law and Ed are Calvert Hall class. It's the whole Baltimore high school thing.
Yeah.
I'm not from Baltimore originally, but I'm a transplant.
You got pulled in.
Yeah, I got pulled in.
But that Baltimore high school network thing, that's kind of, it came into play in the whole thing. It's about all these networks, all these tribes of people that are affiliated with one another. So that's sort of the genesis.
It's all about the teams. But
What year? Absolutely.
What year were you?
83.
83? He was a Loyola grad, by the way, so. I mean, it was kind of like Calvert and,
A lot of good counsel.
what's that?
A lot of good counsel friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
Except on Thanksgiving.
So kind of at the beginning, it sounds like from the panel, it sounds like it's all about the team. It's all about some disruption in the marketplace, either capitalizing or pivoting into it. So those are kind of the things to keep in mind as far as innovating. How do you get into it? It sounds like you really have to kind of talk to your friends, talk to your network, and see who's game to go do something crazy. All right, so now the early years. So a couple questions around the early years. What, and this is for anybody, but I specifically know, like, of the guys that maybe were in the earliest years, maybe Vince, Chris, it sounds like everybody's in the early years now, so anybody can jump in. But what's the biggest obstacle that you had to overcome professionally in the early years? I'll throw that out to anybody.
Professionally or
just...
just?
Biggest obstacle, doesn't have to be, I mean, we're professionals, so just presumably in your craft, what's the biggest obstacle that you've had to overcome?
You want to start?
Yeah, go for it.
I think the biggest obstacle was like fear of doing things that were outside your natural, like my natural training is computer science. And I had fear of accounting and legal and everything else. And when you're a 1 or 2 man shop, you need to just jump in there and realize that none of these things are really rocket science. And the other part is to leverage people through your network or the community or what have you to help you through these areas. But it's really the courage to just do things that you have absolutely no idea what you're doing in those areas.
Excellent. Anybody else?
I was going to sound like a one-trick pony, but for me it was all about keeping the team together. We were the guy who kind of was leading us and made enough money in his first gig. So we were really worried that he'd just stay at the beach every summer. We got to get him back from the beach. But when you go through that early years, there's a lot of ups and downs. It's a roller coaster ride, and the highs are unbelievable, but the lows are unbelievable as well. And keeping everybody together is that guy referred to me as the middle brother in our team, because I'd be the guy going around making sure everybody's happy after we blew up at each other. And somebody, I think Hunter, I was reading the hashtags, but what do you look for in a team? At the end of the day, the biggest thing you look for is you're looking for somebody who, like a family member, you can just rip their head off and they're going to still love you the next day. And John knows that all too well from yesterday. But
And I still love you.
the bottom line is, family loves you no matter what. And if you've got a real partnership, you guys are committed no matter what. And it's hard to start that because at first, you're not completely committed. You're storming and norming. So you got to really work hard at that. But once that's there, you're in that foxhole together, and you can take on anybody. I really encourage focus on making sure your teammates you're solid and you have each other's back, and that you over communicate. And again, the rest takes care of itself.
So one interesting comment is that it seems like it's all about that network of who you can collaborate with in the beginning years. Actually, I think Brian said it yesterday, though. He said the one thing about hiring friends is that ultimately you got to know that friendship might just die out. I forget the exact quote, but if you hire a friend at some point, probably not going to be friends anymore. So there's an interesting distinguishing between friends that are co-founders or partners that you guys are tied at the hip versus a friend that might be employee 2 or 3, which ultimately might not be with you in the long run. So can you guys say definitively that friends are great if they're a founder, but if they're number 2 or 3, chances are they're going to go at some point?
There's a big difference when they're a founder, because I always say it's like getting married, except you don't sleep together. So you have all of the same problems you would have in reality. And you have the burden of making revenues, making payroll, making your expenses. So, the money aspect of the marriage is really tough to deal with. So you do have a lot to work through when you're a founder, but you're committed to do that. Whereas when you hire your friends, you hope that it's there, you hope that they have that same commitment, but it's not necessarily there. You don't have that common bond that's going to get you through the toughest times and see through it. So you have to be ready to fire your friends, which is the toughest thing in the world to do. Hopefully the friendship lasts. Fortunately, I had my son work for me, and he still loves me.
You had to fire him?
I had to fire my
Did
son.
you give him
He knew he needed to be fired, so it wasn't that bad. But it was a tough conversation for a lot of months. And you know you need to fire your son. I said yes, and it's okay, because I knew it wasn't good. It needed to end, and he needed to go and find another life. So that's not necessarily true for the friends that you bring in or other family you bring in. It's just fraught with a lot of other complications that maybe aren't a good thing to deal with.
Just don't do it. Don't hire friends and family.
Yeah, I think
It
the
leads to a
takeaway-
disaster.
Yeah, the takeaway, ultimately, I've hired friends, and unfortunately, I was in that situation where we had to let go, and the friendship died too. So I think the takeaway is found companies with your friends. Don't hire them as employees 2 through 10. You don't really hire them.
And there's two types of
It
friends.
depends on the people.
It depends on the type of friends, though. Like for me, I have work friends, and I have like my best friend, who I've known since I'm 18 months old. She and I grow up and everything. She's like a sister to me, and I made the mistake of hiring her, and I had to fire her, and she still holds that against me, even though we're still best friends. And it's too murky. And like now, if you have I would consider all my co-founders and even a lot of the people I've worked with all my life really close friends, but they're work friends. It's a different type of relationship. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe that's a good distinction. But I look at Paul and I really didn't know each other. We both knew Steve, who was our COO, and Steve was not a founder. He came on a year later. I do think that there's a bond that happens when you start a company and you go through the things that you go through in the early years. And we hired people that were friends and friends for a very long time that didn't work, and we've hired ones like Steve who they get what it takes to be in a startup. They get what it takes to be successful, and because he understands that and because he has that level of commitment, it's we would be a completely different company right now without Steve. And he's he's a great friend, but he's also a phenomenal coworker.
He's a work friend. That relationship started because of your work relationship. It wasn't your buddy from high school who you had great time drinking together.
Well, but I guess that would probably be the case for me, but Paul wasn't like that with Steve, and that's cool. That's not that wasn't sort of how they had gotten together. And so I really think you can't necessarily paint it with those broad brush strokes. I think you've got to
Choose your
recognize,
friends.
but just recognize what their
Or
work
you will
ethic
be
is.
choosing them later.
But I think part of it too is it's when you start a company or start something, you go with who you know, right? So if your friends are your network, so if they have those job skills and they have the capabilities you need. But I think that the big difference isn't so much friend or not friend. It's having and the reason that is your point, Todd, about about being founders together. It's alignment. Yeah. My wife never figured out that if she opened up this one envelope that would come every month that was a home equity line of credit, because she didn't know that I was making payroll and this isn't like she still doesn't know that, so I'm trying to keep it out. But my point is, you make these decisions as founders that are not when you're an employee. It's like I still pay my mortgage.
Did she sign the line of credit too?
No. This is
the house is titled under your name.
No, it's a. We can talk later. This is being filmed. No, it was already. We already had it in place. It was but signing checks. It only took one. But my point is.
I should have got a pool and then had the line open for other things.
When you start a company, you don't start it to get rich, and you don't do this for money. And that is so far down on the priority list. I have very similar reasons for it. But mainly when my wife pointed out a few years after I was talking about an old boss, she goes, "Do you realize everyone you've ever worked for is an idiot?" What does that say, right? I mean, what it says is that I, like these guys, like everybody, right? I wanted to build something. I wanted to actually be proven wrong or right on my own merits. And so that's not something that you can't hire that, right? You can't just find a founder. You have, and so that same kind of like willingness to do, like take risks that seem like really risky in the beginning, and by the time you kind of blow through that risk profile, I had this idea in my head is like, when I spend X amount of savings, I'm done, I gotta go back and get a real job. And I went right through that, and because, it's completely focused on the end. And that's the hard part, is getting that kind of alignment. So if you've got somebody that has that same willingness to bet it all, right, whatever it takes, then I don't think you don't have the same
Yeah,
challenges.
just don't do 50-50.
Yeah, it's really tough.
Whatever you do, if you have a really close friend,
Partnership,
51.
partnerships are tough.
Yeah, 50-50 is brutal, don't do it. Actually, we have just to mix it up, because then, you guys can just get a deadlock, right? You can't move forward. So mix it up, a good question from the Twitter sphere, and we'll actually just go down the row on this one, and we'll do, a kind of a 2x, 3x sort of thing, and you can give an explanation. How much harder is it to start a product company over a services company? Yeah.
A services company, you can hit the street running because you have the talent. If you're able to get the customers, you have revenues right away. A product takes investment, whether that's personal investment. We did a lot of the investment from VMT into Social Toaster to build the product. But it takes a lot of investment, not only money, but time, but heart and soul goes into that product. And it's kind of like a wish and a dream. You believe in this thing you're building. You test it in the marketplace. You believe there's a place in the marketplace for it. But until you've invested all of that and you've created this wonderful thing and put it out into the marketplace, you really don't even know. So it's a lot more investment. It's a lot more that
So
you really
2 times harder, 3 times harder?
Oh man, 4.
4 times harder. Vince, how much harder? Product company versus services?
I've never done a services company, but I've always, I think it's a risk-reward trade-off, is my kind of looking at the world. Services companies, you get revenue now, you're paid for it, and you kind of scale to whatever the demand is there, but you don't get quite the return. You get like a nice little markup, but it doesn't scale. Product scales like you wouldn't believe, but you gotta either strike lightning in a bottle, or you gotta find investors who are willing to live with you while you find that. So it's just a trade-off on risk and return.
4 times, 3 times, 5 times?
I bet it's 10x. I think you can go out and start a service. I mean, you can be a consultant tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody can be a consultant tomorrow, in some form or fashion. But to create a product company, it takes a team. It takes commitment, resources. It's a longer vision. It takes a lot more investment.
So we have a 4x, a 10x. Jason, product versus services?
Multiple, 40x. I mean,
40x. Well, we're getting bigger every time.
well, but here's the thing too, as Vince alluded to, it's really that return. I mean, service companies scale to the number of people, number of billable hours and bodies, right? And the premium, what can you get on that? So product companies, especially software products, obviously scale like anybody's business. So what we did is basically we're a service company masquerading as a product company. So I used to call it customer finance product development, right? Yes, absolutely. That's the next revision for this product. Let's go build it. And so we were building a product on the fly, to spec, but we had the vision, in mind of what we're building, but it's really tough. I mean, it's also really hard because services businesses, I think you tend to be a lot more promiscuous. Like, yeah, we can do that. Product companies, you have to be really focused, and it's really hard to say no, right? And that's my biggest challenge certainly in the early years when you're trying to pay the bills, and you're saying you don't say no to opportunities to generate revenue very often. So it's really apples and oranges when it comes down to it, and it's really tough to do both. I don't know how you do it, especially without having really 2 separate companies. I mean, you have a lot of, like, we would masquerade as professional services, but they were the same guys doing development as well from products, so.
The trick is to say, oh yeah, this is a product you're licensing, but it's going to take us 4 months to configure it for you. You don't need to give me your money, I'm going to go build it.
Yeah, exactly.
Chris, products or services, what is it, 40x, 20x?
Boy, I don't, it's definitely harder for products, but it's, it's hard to get sales on services, so, you've still got to go out there.
Did ad.com sell services? You guys did websites and
Well, no,
stuff
we
too,
were,
right?
we were, prior to ad.com, it was, military contracting, and so that's really very services, oriented, and so, I think that was easier to start up. That was a services company that wanted to be a product company.
You did military services, or the grassroots of ad.com was it?
No, this was before
Okay.
ad.com. I used to joke about, whatever it was, delivering artillery or delivering ads. That was kind of my thing. So, I don't know. 3.1415. Sorry.
Ed, products and services. Do you guys have products?
We have in the past, and I had worked at product companies before. I answer the question this way. My kids code, and they're working on products right now. They'll probably put them on the App Store, and they'll be off and running with a product company at age 13 and 15. Do you think anybody would buy services from those kids? And do you think that they could get a service company up to 10, 20, 50 million? They might be able to get up to 10, 20, 50 million with products before they graduate college. So, I don't know. I think running a service company is in some ways more difficult because you have to pay that payroll. You can't miss and have a downtime. If you're a product company and things aren't going well, you can always mothball, weather the storm, and come back out again when you have more money. You can't do that with a service company.
That's
You're
a great
out.
point. So I think the interesting kind of takeaway is, to some degree, caveating off what you said is, if you have not yet graduated college, start a products company. If you graduated college and you have no revenue, go into services. But if you graduated college and you have access to revenue, go products. I think that's kind of the decision tree right there.
Well, Ed does make a good point, and that is the barriers to product companies are much lower. For software products, obviously, with, I remember when we were shopping for our first server back in 2000, co-location at, $2,000 a month for a Pentium 100, in somebody's closet somewhere. It's just, the cost of everything is so much more reasonable now. And then the whole, the App Store and some other channels, the sales and marketing pieces become a lot less expensive too, and you get faster.
But with
Yeah.
that has come noise. So the
Totally.
noise, the signal to noise is a lot, it's a lot harder to separate yourself from the pack, because look at that App Store. It's
Yeah.
full of stuff.
I think it depends on your definition of when you're a company, right?
Yeah.
So, for the
Well, some-
$8 your kids are going to get from Apple for the App Store, they should buy lottery tickets, and that's all.
Someone should create a technology to make your friends into champions or cheerleaders for your product. And
Oh,
there you go. Get through the noise.
Actually, we got another really good question from the Twitter sphere, so I'll jump to that. Any tips when finding early employees by offering equity? I'm not sure what your guys' feeling is about pulling those early employees for equity. I've had some strong feelings, but I'd be very interested in hearing from you guys about offering up equity.
Well, so that was sort of the driver for us, and obviously took it, that was part of the reason why it had so many people stay to take us public. I think, I think there's sort of two schools of thought on that, and I think it depends on the type of company that you are. But you either have the option of doing a one-time grant when you hire everybody, and that's what they get, or you can say, hey, you can have equity. It's going to be small as long as you prove your worth. More and more will come of it. But I do think that's why people go to startups. They go to startups because there's the hope that that this equity will be worth something, and sometimes it is, sometimes it
So where do you draw the line then? Obviously, if you're founding a company, the first person you hire might get equity. The second person might get one. Does employee 15 get equity?
We have given equity to absolutely every employee that
Can you speak up
started.
just a little bit?
Sure. We give an equity to absolutely every employee. So, that's, it's an alignment principle for us. We want everybody to be marching for the same goal, and that's to grow the business and to grow the stock price. And, that's part of one of the things we decided early as an alignment principle for us.
We actually had a venture capitalist say, oh, the new trend in the Valley is that, all the lower level employees, they don't value the equity, we're not going to give it away. And
Where would you draw the line then?
But no, and we fought it tooth and nail. We gave it to every single employee, and it was exactly for that same point of alignment. Look, there's definitely going to be stratification across your organization on how much wealth creation event will happen. But at the end of the day, we can even our the lowest level employee in the company had a really good day the day we were bought. For some people it was buying a car, some people it was buying a house, some people it was a life-changing event. But at the end of the day, that was a really good day, and everybody, we walked out of there unified from a cultural perspective, starting and ending. And so, at the end of the day, I talk a lot about team. I'm going to live with these people the rest of my life, right? And so I'm going to do new things and other things in my life. And you can't, life's too short to be trying to hold it all to yourself.
I think the real key is would somebody work with you again?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the real testament. I've done a bunch of different startups too before I started Hooglu, and I've got a drawer full of options that are worthless, right? And I used to say you can't buy groceries with options. They're not liquid. I agree 100% with the alignment. I think if you want employees, you hire them and you pay them a competitive salary or above market or however you buy that talent, but they're mercenaries. If you want owners, you make them owners. And I think everyone is anyone who is valuable enough to hire should be an owner. That's my opinion. That being said, it's such it's like a lottery ticket. It really is. I mean, these guys are the exception, right? Not the norm that you have a public exit. Statistics are, if you really believe the statistics, nobody's going to start a company that's going to require venture capital because it's just not going to happen. It's like a fraction of a fraction of a percent. But that doesn't stop us from doing it. But at the end of the day, it really is about sharing in what you help create. I mean, there was a guy who painted the mural in Facebook's first headquarters, made like $200 million. A mural painter, because he got paid in stock, right? Well, that's the exception, right? I mean, that in the .com days when they were getting haircuts and paying the hairdressers with stock certificates.
Apparently, the founder of Xerox gave his plumber some shares in Millennial now. Come fix this in. Yeah.
But again, it's just like eventually somebody finds a Declaration of Independence in a flea market in Philly too. It's the exception, not the norm. I think at the end of the day, it's really that's more about just a representative of what you want to be as a company. It's not the reason that you join a company. It just goes with the territory.
It's about your
just a
values.
note there, our investors require that we have stock options to be able to offer top echelon people an incentive to come into the company. Yet we still are offering phantom stock, which is a way for everyone in the company to participate in the upside of the company.
Yeah, so it seems pretty universal with Mindgrub. We have 15% of the company we've distributed all employees as phantom stock. And everybody lives and bleeds, Mindgrub, and it's really important. And obviously, as employee 50 for us comes on board, they don't get as much as employee 2. But everybody gets a piece of the pie. It's been a huge help.
Well, actually, that's a good point, though. That what you don't want to do is, I think, what Pincus is, and Zynga with, pulling back or clawing back. I mean, that is such poor form. I mean, we have decided after the fact that, I made my early employees too rich, and I'm pulling back. I think that's what you want to avoid at all costs.
Absolutely. I think that put a little bit of a bad
How do you
taste
live
in
with
my mouth.
yourself?
I don't know.
All right, we're going to go about another 10 minutes since we started a few minutes late. So we've gone over the early years, we've gone over the beginning, talked about the growth years briefly. Let's talk about scaling the operation. So the next question, I'll just throw this out to anybody. is where is the most significant growth going to occur in the company in the next few years? With each of your companies, each of your organizations, where do you think that significant growth is going to come from? What's going to allow you to scale your operation?
Well, for us, it's ramping up the revenues. We have this investment, and we've taken it and really invested in the team, the people. You can't really grow a company without having the right people in place who really see where you want to go and will do what it takes to get there. I mean, really put in 150% effort to do that. So, we've made the investment in building the team so that we can really grow those revenues. And we really anticipate growing to 3 times our size by the end of next year. So our challenge right now is really managing that growth. You talk about what is it going to take. So I think for us it's going to take really keen management of how quickly we grow and the team that we put behind it.
Absolutely. So all about the team.
It is.
That's
It
kind of
really
a common
is.
theme.
Yeah.
Anybody else see anything that's going to really contribute to significant growth, independent of potentially teaming, and who the employees are?
I'll field this one. LCG used to be a much larger company, and then they went through different periods where they kind of lost focus and the management switched over, and we're in restart mode. So the first thing we went out and did was acquire some of the best rock stars in certain technologies. And we plan to expand rapidly based on their capabilities and their subject matter expertise. But the biggest thing that's going to be important with executing that plan is finding the skilled engineers and technicians to continue that vision and to be at the forefront, because in software development, there's a lot of competition and margin erosion on the bottom levels. But at the top levels, there's such a shortage in the Baltimore area of quality, skilled software developers that in some ways, whoever corners the market on hiring and talent evaluation and acquisition, it's almost a zero-sum game here. So we plan to win that game.
Yeah, and I'll caveat that. We've noticed it's really easy to find people with 1 to 3 years experience who are just out of college. We've got, per capita, some of the best colleges producing engineers. It's phenomenal. 4 to 8 years experience is really hard, because if they are an all-star, they're going to go to New York, they're going to go DC maybe, out west, and it's really hard to get them. Now, a little trick that I'll let you know is the 28 to 30-year-old that's in San Fran or New York that is still single or trying to settle down and can't afford real estate there, they're coming back. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I want us all on the same page. That 28 to 30-year-old who can't afford New York property, isn't quite getting shacked up with a significant other in San Fran, they're coming back in droves. So that is our opportunity for Baltimore to really get back that kind of middle experience that we haven't had. So that's absolutely something we've noticed, and we personally target people that are native Baltimore, that live in New York or San Fran, that are in that 28 to 30-year-old. The first interview question I have is, how's your love life? Or have you bought real estate?
But,
And if the love life is bad or you haven't bought real estate, I fly
he obviously doesn't have a very good lawyer. He's got a really good lawyer.
It's one or the other. All right, excellent. So more with scaling the operation. One thing, actually, Ed contributed to this question, and it's about innovation in the office space. What have you found in terms of creating your environment is really important for the office space and innovating within the office space?
We love our new space.
And where are you now?
We're at Clipper Mill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we actually sublet the space, which was really good for us in 2 ways. We have this tremendous growth projected, so we couldn't bite off too much space and sign a long-term lease. We needed a short-term lease, and it was ready-made. There were cubes, there was furniture, there was infrastructure. It took us a week to move, and most of that week, well, part of that week was at least productive for most everybody. So it really worked well for us, but the environment was also very important because we want an open and collaborative environment where you don't have to get up and walk to somebody's office to talk to them. You can just look over the cube and then you have a conversation.
So you have cubes?
We have cubes.
But they're half wall.
Yeah, we're making them, yeah. We were taking
Yeah,
them.
so full cubes
Yeah.
are out.
Oh, yeah.
If you're gonna go cubes, it's the half wall.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the thing is you want to be able to have that collaborative environment regardless of the type of company you are. So that was very important.
Actually, do you have like a gaming station and?
We
pool
have
and-
a corduroy room with great big chairs, great big corduroy chairs, and it's where everybody goes to really think hard.
Are the walls blue too?
Glass.
Glass.
Brick, glass, yeah.
Excellent. Any other innovations in the office space?
We had a really cool office today. We co-worked at ed.com today, so.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting model. So Jason eliminated their office entirely, and they work entirely virtual. We had them here for a day.
Yep, we work here. We, part of it is to save that rent check. I figure we've collectively spent about $500,000 over the last 13 years on an office and ETC that virtually no one had ever seen. I didn't even really know where it was.
It's all the way
In the
back.
back. One of the original leases, right? But we broke the lease and then we told Ann and Neil. So always ask for forgiveness versus permission. But in reality, it's not about saving the rent check for us. Going back to my product management days at DeWalt and Black & Decker, right? I mean, I got kicked out of my boss's office on more than one occasion saying, get out and talk to miter site users. Go out to the job site. So we're working with our peeps. I mean, we don't have members anymore, but the people that come to the events or that, this is how you understand your market, your customers, is to actually work with them and spend time. You can't invent solutions sitting in an office and collaborating amongst yourselves. We also, we'll co-work together a couple times a week typically. But when you have such a small staff, it makes you look a lot bigger when you can be in 4 different places at once. And so it's worked out really well.
We have extra space right now.
So we're there.
Yep.
So it is all about that half wall, about that collaboration. There's other things you can do to really kind of invigorate your culture. Chris, are you still hitting the gong?
We do.
The gong or the bong? What was it?
For the gong, yes, we still do that. It's funny. We actually we started out in the ETC and we were in one small room, and then we got to split to 2 rooms, and then grew, and then we were all on the 3rd floor of the signature building right above Langerman's. And it was great because engineers, everybody, when we had a big sale, they'd ring the gong and, everybody was excited about it. And then we split up onto the 2nd floor, and then everybody thought the company was doing terribly because they never heard the gong anymore. What's going on? Why aren't we selling anything?
You need to simulcast the
So
gong.
we needed to simulcast the gong. But, it's funny, we've done, some acquisitions and things like that. And so I've actually seen pockets of different cultures all throughout our company. We have an office in DC, and they're completely different than the office that we have in San Francisco, and the Baltimore office is its own thing. And different things work for each of those. So in the Baltimore office, we've got there's a little band area that they can do that, and they've got ping pong and all of that sort of thing. Out in San Francisco, we've got we've probably got 10 or 15 rooms that are available, that they can spread out to. All of the engineers are crammed into this one room, and it's not even the biggest room. So I don't, so I think people find their own culture, and they want to be sitting there. They want to, they want to overhear, you talking about something that's going screwy on, your app or what have you. So, it's, I don't know that there's any one, this is what's going to work best. Certain people work in certain environments better, but I think the more time that you can get people to collaborate and to talk to clients and what have you, the better off I think you're going to be. So,
Ed, coolest feature of your office?
Well, our office has got a cool feature, but being as a consultant, I get to drive around and see lots of different offices. And what I think is a interesting thing that's going on these days is sort of co-working, where people that have extra space, like you just said,
Yeah.
you're like, come stay at our place,
Absolutely.
and they're getting these very interesting, and I'm going to say it, synergies.
Moochers?
Because they're like, they've got a marketing company sitting in a software development company's office. So you get this like bleed through of concepts and things. And people are doing wacky things. I was on this horse farm in Glenarm, And in the barns were these trailers with energy traders in them. So when I pulled into the parking lot, I'm like, where is this building?
Home-based startup, I guess?
No, this company's been around for like 30 years. They were like, we're like Enron without the corruption.
That's why they're hiding in a horse barn.
And that's apparently why they're hiding over farmers. But these were like very inventive sort of solutions are going on, and I think this is actually going to be somewhat problematic for commercial real estate, because people want to have flexible space that grows and shrinks with their company, and they also want to move around Baltimore. So I think that in the area, you're going to see a lot more co-working spaces, a lot of like office suites, sort of temp to perm sort of space, or where you can buy space like so many rooms, but you can use those rooms in Annapolis or in Baltimore and things as your business changes. So I think that's an area, and all else fails, go to the Wegmans and use the second floor of it.
Absolutely, you got a cater right there. Well, excellent. So we're at kind of a little over an hour, so I want to give you guys at least 15 minutes if there's some questions from the audience. Yes, Jeff.
So what do you recommend for people, friends? So you said as a business owner, get your friends in from the beginning, don't hire them. Okay? So on the flip side, I've had a situation where I was a family member going into the family business, and I'll say it was holy hell. And, you know, people that are thinking about doing that, what recommendation you have to them to thicken their skin and prepare them that they're not going to be involved with what they thought they'd be involved with family and friends and so forth. And have you had anybody be able to polarize that you work with, you know, moving forward, or has it ever worked?
So I'm not, we brought a lot of family and friends in, and it's much easier later stage. So my brother and like 5 family members work there, but they're like so far removed from what I do that it's not a problem. So I would say my biggest advice is, and this is the hardest part, but when you hire in or when you're applying in, don't expect any favors and don't do any favors. Do what that person's qualified for or what you think they can be capable of doing. Because our most successful people who did that were like friends or family, like Gary's neighbor, he had like half his neighbors working there. And we have a couple of them that have been really, really successful because they actually had all the skills for the job. And they did great, you know. Where we probably struggled was when we were trying to kind of help people and maybe give them more than they deserved or more than they were capable of, and we, you know, found out. So, you know, treat it as if it's a blind interview and treat it as if it's a blind hire. And I think you end up with a much better outcome than doing anybody a favor, because you end up everybody hating each other at the end.
Excellent. Any other questions? Yes.
There's been a lot of emphasis on building a solid team from the start. I'm just wondering, I actually posted the question about the equity. I'm just curious, like, where do you draw that line from just, you know, starting, building your product or whatever it is to basically, when do you have the right people in place? Like, when do you decide that?
Would you feel you filled out your team enough?
Well, what do you feel? I mean, just give you some context. Like, we're early stage, pre-revenue, pre-product. You know, we've got some people helping us. They may not be the ideal people, but we have to get moving. You know, we've got to start building the product. So, I guess I'm just looking for advice for, you know, whatever.
What's your role?
Product director.
Okay, so I think my experience was that it's always sooner than the technology guy wants it to be, and it's always a little longer than the sales guy wants it to be. So there's some time in the middle where you're going to be very, you know, the tech guy is going to be very uncomfortable because it's not exactly where it needs to be, and that's the right time to get going. You know, you can work on things forever. You can work on things forever as a technologist and add more and do more pieces to it, but you know, in the end, you've got to get out there and start getting some interest in it. there's a great book that I wish was available when we started our company, but it's called The Lean Startup, and a phenomenal phenomenal amount of analysis has gone into the things that they're doing and the ideas that they've communicated, and you want to get out there and get your stuff in front of the customer as quickly as you can to find out if whether or not you're building your pre-product. That's perfect time, because what you may put out there as a product 6 months from now, nobody, it might be that nobody wants that. And so, the earlier that you can get that out there and get people to start looking at it, no matter how uncomfortable that is, I would say the better. That's been my philosophy. And I know when we started Millennial, our business is very odd. You have to have something for the advertisers to buy, and you have to have advertisers for the publishers to want to give you inventory. And so you've got to manage that process. And we went out there with neither of those things and got going and figured out how we needed to build the product and how it needed to change. So I think the sooner the better would be my advice.
Yeah, I assume everybody, you're here at the Tech Meetup, so MVP is probably a very common term, but I heard a great quote recently. It said, if you're proud of your MVP, you waited too long. I mean, it should be something you're embarrassed by, that it's out too early, but that's the whole point, right? And exactly to Chris's point, I mean, it's that learning that, as quickly as possible. If your question was actually, at least based on, maybe I misunderstood, you said you'd ask about equity. In my mind, especially if you're doing software, avoid the question or the concern of like hiring your friends or bringing on fixed costs. Do it completely outsourced. I mean, contract whatever whether it's freelance or rent-a-code or finding Todd does custom development. Whatever you can do to minimize the risk of locking, whether it's friends or just hiring somebody who's putting their trust in you, that they're going to be able to pay their bills based on a paycheck.
I guess the real question is, how do you find that solid team? How do you find the right people just offering equity?
You can't just offer it. Well,
Kind of case by case.
Yeah, it sounds like from earlier discussions, you got to tap your network.
Well, and it's sort of like people who wait until they need a job to start networking. That's too late. If you're not constantly cultivating network and developing relationships, you're going to end up with people that are really desperate, right, or that need something then. And so that's not the time to start. You just constantly have to be, it's like banking and credit. It's like, my opinion of networking in general is look for ways to help other people, not because you need something, it comes back around to you eventually, right? Whether it's karma or whatever you want to call it. And so I think that's the same way when you're building a team, like Vince said. I mean, you're working with the same people and over again. There's obviously a very high level of trust that doesn't happen immediately. That happens over time.
Ed?
I would say if people are joining your company for equity and that's what they're joining for, you got a problem already. I think you really want to get people to join your team that want to be part of that project. They want to be, and then equity will fall out of that conversation. But if they're asking you first question, how big is my piece of the pie here? You probably have the wrong people. They should be asking questions like, how soon do you need this to get to market? What is your strategy? They're into the same thing. And you got to find them in the network. You got to make some subtle noise about what you're doing, and they'll come to you. Unless you're doing something terribly boring and bad, and that probably means you're on the wrong track anyway.
And I think it's twofold. So they shouldn't be overly asking for equity. At the same time, don't overpromise and underdeliver.
Right.
So a lot of times they say, "Oh man, I'm going to cut you in," and they work their ass off for 6 months, and they're like, "Hey man, we're like 50-50, right?" Nah, I was really thinking 2%. That will take the wind out of their sails right away. So you've got to make sure you set expectations. Which is important, but you got to make sure they're not also over-eager to want so much equity without also contributing, because if you give away too much equity and then they don't give that, value in terms of the amount of equity, then that deflates you in the fact that you have somebody who gave away too much equity. So it's kind of a balance. Maybe start off small and incentivize and build up, and you can actually have agreements that based on certain milestones they achieve certain equity. So it's better to provide that structure instead of giving away the farm or giving away too little. It's better to have kind of what they call a vesting schedule, and and that as they build up and hit certain milestones, their equity vests.
Yeah, I think, one other thing to sort of note on that is that it may not, so two things. It may not matter long term if your plan is to get, raise capital and do those sorts of things. That could end up being a reboot at that point anyway. And then if you have a very ugly cap table that will make, an angel investor or a VC run away from your, no matter how great your idea is, if it's ugly, they are going to want to steer clear of it. And so to the extent that you can say, look, we're at this stage, we're going to have to figure that out later, but you don't want to get yourself into a situation where you paint yourself into a corner and have such an ugly cap table that nobody wants to invest in you. That could be a limiting factor for sure.
Great, another question?
So, since we all can't be experts on every single subject in the room, or at least try to be.
It is.
He
didn't even waver from that either.
What is your opinion on like advisory boards, board of directors, working with people who are experts in the areas that you're lacking?
Most necessary. Nobody can be an expert in everything. And if you choose your advisors wisely, then you can gain so much more, so much faster. We've used a number of different consultants to come in, not only to put together the raise, but even before that, just in putting our books in order and our house in order. Use all the people who have the expertise that you don't have as much as you can. And that isn't just paid consultants, but that's also what everybody's been saying in your network. In your peer group, there's people who know a lot more about certain aspects of business than you do. So there's a lot of other smart people who are there to help you in a lot of different ways.
That's, all jokes aside, I know a lot of smart people. That's the most important thing. And one of the things Baltimore can do, and I hope we do coming out of this meetup, is share our knowledge with one another. If you've gone through an experience and learned from the school of hard knocks, helping the next generation or the next group of people out, nobody should have to keep repeating the same mistakes out there. So tap the network, ask the question. But then you're going to get 5 answers, all different. At least you'll have 3 of them that you didn't even think about.
I would say that the flip side of that too is don't build a board of advisors because you think you need it or you need something impressive sounding on your website. I get a lot of requests, right, for advice, but most of them from people who don't really want to listen, and so take it for what it's worth. I mean, my advice, money back guarantee for that as well, right? It's free, but ask it because you really want and need the answer and you're willing to listen. Doesn't mean you're going to actually agree or end up doing that, but if you're just doing it because you think you need it, don't bother, because you're wasting everybody's time.
All right, we have time for 2 more questions. One here and then there. Why don't you go first?
Oh, sure. It seems like you guys have been involved in several companies and transitions. At what point do you start considering exit strategies in terms of the development of the firm and how you're going to exit? Do you always wait for a third-party buyout, or what is your experience?
So you're talking about good exits, not bad exits.
Necessity.
Done them both. The exit and the good exit is the one that anybody who goes into business is looking for. It's not necessarily the one that you're going to end up choosing. I had a company that I sold to a .com. Well, it was 2000. What happened in 2011? Bomb! I had a lot of worthless stock. So, I thought it was the right time. I had the offer on the table. Looked like the company would be listed on the NASDAQ. Didn't happen. Market forces took over. So I think, you're looking for that opportunity. You're always looking for that opportunity. What I didn't do in the .com sale was really trust my instincts. And I think that's one of the things that you lose when you get wrapped up in the glamour of it And I mean, you had a great exit, but I mean, it's just so compelling to go after that gold ring that sometimes you really don't look at the whole picture. So that's really what I'd recommend. And any deal that comes to the table, we're going to have deals coming to the table, is, look at the whole picture and go with your gut.
So I think of startup business as about creating options. So you, in some ways, you're thinking about it from day one in the sense that you're trying to create value. And there's going to be lots of buyers of that value. And you don't know who the best buyer is, where you're going to maximize your value. But you're...
From within. It can come from employees. It can come from...
Right.
You could do management buyout.
Yeah. I mean, but at the end of the day, the point is create value, and create value that there's lots of buyers for, and then you'll have lots of options. I mean, that was the magic of our situation, was there were a lot of people interested in what we had created. And the best place in the world to be is having lots of options. The worst place to be is when you've taken one shot and it didn't work out.
Right. I would say pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. I think there are great examples, and one that comes to mind for me is Groupon, which when they passed up a $6 billion all cash deal from Google, and went public, and I guess that still could work, but I think that's you have to look at things, and exactly as Vince said, it's businesses are valued in the strictest sense on their ability to generate cash, right? I mean, if you take the pure financial or MBA definition, and so if you're valuing your business as based on what an emotion, or it's your baby or whatever else, you'll never sell it for what it's worth, right? And if that's your goal, but ultimately, I think that's not you don't start businesses to sell them. I mean, that's called a burger, right? To flip. You start businesses because it's a way to actually create a job. My mother-in-law, it took her 8 years for her to figure out that I could actually create a job, right? You don't make jobs, you go out and get one. And to me, that's the only reason to start a business, is because it's supporting something that you're able to pursue your passion and hopefully make support your chosen standard of living. So the right time to sell is when that's no longer, interesting, or you can get a multiple on what you think it's worth.
I'm going to just be contrarian a little bit.
Absolutely, I expect
If I'm Andrew and I'm able to take a few $100 million off the table pre-IPO, and I get to run the company how I want to, I might be perfectly happy whatever the value is, because I've already made my 10 figures, and I get to run my company the way I want to run it. So as much as Groupon could have maximized their value in a different way, which I know is kind of the objective of business, he gets to run the business. And sometimes, to your point, this is bigger than just maximizing your wealth.
Zuckerberg.
This is about doing something you think is really important and you're passionate about, and sometimes that takes a longer vision, and that takes go through bumps, and God knows, we all herald Steve Jobs, and 20 years ago we thought he was a buffoon. So so it's, don't focus solely on the return, the exit, how you maximize your wealth. Make sure you get your security, make sure you reach those minimum kind of thresholds for you, but make sure you're actually having impact in the world, and at the end of the day, you leave this world feeling like I made a difference.
All right, great. Let's do one last question here.
Yeah, you were talking earlier about product companies versus service companies, and how it can be a challenge to run both at the same time. Do you see it as a sound strategy, given the importance of building the right team, to start a service company with kind of a planned pivot to a product company?
Oh, great question. Yes.
It worked for us.
If you can do it,
Yeah.
great.
But
Did.
If you can get the investment dollars, you go straight into the products.
Yeah.
right, if you can get a customer to pay for building a product, that's a
even
wonderful
better.
thing. It takes a huge amount of discipline to separate the two companies, keep separate P&L statements, and realize that you can't rob one side when you get a problem on the other side. And that's why most companies fail doing it. They're really at their heart a service company, or they're really at their heart a product company. they don't realize that it takes almost diametrically opposed management styles to manage the two
It's
different
actually
things.
taken us, I'd say, 2.5 of the 3 years to actually make the separation. And it's not only tough, like you're saying, Rob, Peter, to pay Paul, but the staff gets so confused about who they, it's like you're schizophrenic. Am I services or am I product? What am I doing today? Because it really does take a different mindset to be a service provider as to be a product developer. So we've taken the pill, we're no longer as schizophrenic as we were. But it was very tough. And
Is that just capital
very
driven?
difficult to do.
It's just cash flow and services usually?
Well,
capital
yeah,
requirements versus
yeah, we use
investment?
the cash flow from the services business to fund the product development. Fortunately, we had customers to help fund it as well. From the get-go, we had customers to pay for proof of concept. So that helped as well. But still, it's a real balancing act. And, you know, it really affects everyone in their day-to-day job. And in knowing what they're supposed to do day-to-day, that really becomes a big part of the problem.
All right, well, thank you. I want to try to keep to the clock here. So we're 5 after the hour, which is an hour and a half from where we started. So let's, we can stay till all the alcohol is gone. Feel free to mingle, keep talking to everybody. Hopefully the panel will stick around. But let's give a big by all means, if you guys have additional questions, we can kind of channel you to each of the panelists.